You reach for the salt shaker without thinking it is just there on the table next to the pepper. The whole action takes less than 2 seconds. But for most of human existence, salt was one of the hardest things on Earth to find. Not inconvenient, not expensive, genuinely physically difficult to find. Your ancestors spent hundreds of thousands of years searching for it, craving it, sometimes dying without it. And the craving you feel right now, that pull toward salty food, that reflex that makes plain food feel unfinished, that is not a preference, that is a biological instruction written into your nervous system before the first human walked upright. The salt on your table is the end of a 300,000-year search, and the story of how we found it is one of the most important and least told stories in all of human history. By the end of this video, you will never reach for that salt shaker the same way again. Your body needs sodium to survive, not wants needs. Your heart uses it to fire, your neurons use it to send signals. Without sodium, the fluid around your cells collapses, your blood pressure drops, your muscles stop contracting properly. A human being can die of sodium deficiency in days. Your body knows this, it has always known this, so it built in an alarm system, a craving so sharp and specific that you can feel it right now if you go long enough without eating salt. Ancient humans felt that alarm constantly, and they had no reliable way to answer it. The first clue doesn't come from a laboratory, it comes from watching animals. Every large herbivore on Earth seeks out sodium deposits. Elephants in Kenya travel up to 40 kilometers to reach mineral-rich caves in Mount Elgon, where they use their tusks to chip salt-laced rock from the walls. Your ancestors watched this. They were close observers of animal behavior. They followed herds, tracked migration patterns, and the places animals returned to again and again. Those were the places humans returned to as well. For hundreds of thousands of years, the strategy was simple. Go where the animals go, eat what the animals eat. Let the landscape tell you where the sodium is. But that strategy had a brutal flaw. Salt licks are not evenly distributed. They cluster in certain geological regions and are almost entirely absent in others. The East African Rift Valley, where much of early human evolution played out, is actually relatively sodium-poor in many areas. Sodium scarcity may have been a persistent low-grade stress for early hominins, not a crisis, but a constant background pressure, a body always slightly undersupplied, a craving never fully answered. Among foraging groups, rare and high-value resources like honey, fat, and mineral-rich foods were shared more broadly than common ones. If one member of the group found a salt deposit, it didn't stay private, it spread, because the group's survival depended on sodium reaching everyone, not just the finder. Not through trade, not through ownership, but through the same cooperative instinct that made our species survive when stronger, faster animals did not. Picture a group of early humans, maybe 25 people, moving through what is now Ethiopia, roughly 100,000 years ago, following a dry riverbed north, because the rains have been poor. One of them, a woman in her 30s who has made this route before, leads them toward a bend in the valley, where she remembers the clay smells different, where the earth has a faint whitish crust after it dries. They stop, they scrape the earth with flat stones in their fingers, they eat the clay directly from the ground, their bodies pulling sodium from the mineral-rich soil. The taste is sharp, slightly bitter, nothing like the clean salt you know, but their bodies respond immediately. That alkaline mineral signal registers somewhere below thought, somewhere older than language, and it feels like relief. They sleep there that night, they stay 2 days, and then they move on because the deposit is not large and not permanent, and the sodium it contains is already beginning to run out. Find it, use it up, move on. That was the rhythm of salt for most of human history. The Hadza of Tanzania, one of the last surviving hunter-gatherer populations on Earth, get most of their sodium from meat and from the organs of the animals they hunt. A Hadza hunter who brings down an impala eats the liver almost immediately, still warm, and the sodium inside that organ does real physiological work. The Hadza do not season their food. They do not reach for a shaker. But their bodies are not deficient, because their food still carries the sodium that processing has stripped from yours. The Kunsan of the Kalahari consumed roughly 690 milligrams of sodium per day from their natural diet, no added salt, just food, and that number is almost exactly what modern cardiologists consider the ideal daily sodium intake. Your ancestors were hitting the target without trying, because the food itself was right, and then agriculture arrived and everything broke. In 2011, archaeologist Olivier Weller published findings from a site in northeastern Romania called Lunca. What he found there pushed the known timeline of deliberate salt extraction back further than almost anyone expected. The site contained ceramic vessels, fire pits, and structural remains dating to approximately 6000 ECE, roughly 8,000 years ago. The layout matched a deliberate salt production facility. This wasn't accidental contact with a mineral deposit. This was a system, a process. People were returning to this location specifically, repeatedly, to manufacture salt. But here's what stopped researchers cold. Munca wasn't a civilization. There was no city nearby, no written language, no complex government. The people using that site were Neolithic villagers, early farmers, who had only recently stopped living as nomads. The pots alone tell the story. Weller's team found hundreds of broken ceramic fragments, the casualties of a process that involved filling heavy pots with brine and holding them over intense heat for hours at a time. The pots cracked from the heat. They kept making new ones. The broken pot count suggests Lunca was not used occasionally. It was used continuously, season after season, possibly for generations. And the salt didn't stay there. Chemical analysis of artifacts found at sites up to 100 kilometers from Lunca showed sodium signatures consistent with the mineral profile of the spring at Lunca. The salt was moving. Salt was already a commodity before bronze was discovered, before writing existed, before any empire rose or fell. 3 different continents, 3 different cultures, no contact with each other, all arriving at the same conclusion within roughly the same 1,000-year window. Romania, China, Peru. When a behavior appears independently across separate populations at roughly the same time, it usually means something in the environment changed. And something had. Farming had just begun. When humans settled down and began eating primarily wheat, barley, millet, and rice, their sodium intake collapsed. Domesticated grain has almost no sodium. A diet built on cereal crops is a diet that leaves your body chronically undersupplied with the one mineral your nervous system cannot manufacture on its own. The craving that had always been there became unbearable because now the food wasn't answering it anymore. Salt didn't become precious because humans suddenly decided they liked the taste. Salt became precious because farming made deficiency the default, and once deficiency was the default, control of salt became control of survival. We traded the nutrient-dense organs of wild animals for fields of grain and accidentally created a sodium crisis. Every Roman soldier was paid partly in salt, which is where the word salary comes from. Every ancient Egyptian mummy preserved a natron, a sodium compound, because sodium was so fundamental to their understanding of preservation and purity that they used it on the dead. The Timbuktu salt trade at its peak in the 14th and 15th centuries moved slabs of Saharan rock salt across 1,000 kilometers of desert to be exchanged sometimes weight for gold. Because in a farming world far from the sea and far from mineral springs, salt could keep you alive, and gold could not. We invented empires, partly to control it, we drew borders around it, we taxed it. In 18th century France, the gabelle, a salt tax, was one of the most reviled instruments of royal power. And these 1930 salt march in India was not a protest about seasoning. It was a protest about survival, about a colonial power taxing a substance that 1 billion people's bodies required to function. That is what salt is, not a condiment, a controlled substance, a mineral that governments understood long before nutritional science existed was so necessary that whoever controlled it controlled everything else. And then something strange happened. Salt got cheap. Industrial evaporation, mechanized mining, global shipping. In roughly 150 years, salt went from a precious commodity to one of the cheapest substances on the planet. Today, a kilogram of table salt costs less than a cup of coffee. It is in almost every processed food you eat, added invisibly before the package ever reaches you. The scarcity ended, the craving did not. Your nervous system, your gut, your kidneys, your cardiovascular system, they are all still calibrated for a hunter-gatherer's sodium intake, roughly 700 milligrams per day. The average modern person in the United States consumes about 3,400 milligrams per day, nearly 5 times that amount, almost entirely from food that has been salted before you touch it. And yet, the craving doesn't turn off. Your brain doesn't register enough, because the system that evolved to chase down a rare and vital mineral was never designed for a world where sodium is inside everything. In 2011, neuroscientist Wolfgang Löscher published research showing that sodium deficiency activates the same reward pathways as addictive substances, flooding the nucleus accumbens with dopamine. When sodium is finally consumed, the relief of salt is not metaphorical, it is neurochemical. Your brain is rewarding you for finding something it believes is rare. It has not been told that it isn't rare anymore. You are running ancient software in a modern environment. The software is doing exactly what it was always supposed to do: chase sodium, signal relief when you find it. Never fully switch off the alarm, because for 300,000 years, switching it off would have killed you. Somewhere in northeastern Romania, 8,000 years ago, a person crouched over a cracked clay pot and scraped white crystals from the bottom with their fingernails. They were solving the same problem your body is trying to solve every time you reach for the shaker. The salt on your table is the end of a 300,000-year search. Your ancestors tasted it in blood and clay and mineral spring water. They followed elephants to find it. They boiled brine for hours in pots they knew would break. They carried it across deserts and paid for it with gold. They built empires to control it and revolutions to take it back. And now it sits there, 2 feet away, unremarkable. The craving is still there. The search is just over. Next time, you reach for that shaker. Without thinking, remember, your ancestors spent 300,000 years searching for what your hand just found in 2 seconds.